Let's look at kind of a hardcore mainline reality example that probably happens all the time. The couple gets married, big Disney-esque smiles on their faces, walking down the aisle, looking off in the future till death do us part. And everything goes fine until the husband comes home early one day and finds his wife in bed with the gardener. And naturally, this very upsetting, who knows what kind of theatrics is going to happen in time, and probably will lead to divorce. But during the unfolding of the divorce, the ego is going to decide on this new information, how it's going to use this information, whether it's going to tuck the information away, whether it's going to self-justify somehow with this information, or whether the ego is going to actually consider this thing, actually look at it differently, actually allow it to change his conceptualization of marriage, his conceptualization of women, to a more complex, realistic kind of characterization, so that he can go forward the next time, if he decides to continue having relationships and marriages, with a more sophisticated, a more complex and comprehensive look at the situation. Now, even though the ego can develop, it can expand its little box of awareness to larger realities, its real talent, the real talent of this little guy is holding one place. As I said before, most people stay at the self-aware stage, stage that they probably popped into in their teenage years for the rest of their lives. So this little ego is really good at holding on to what he got. And you may ask, well, how does he do that? Well, the ego has many tricks. And probably if you're watching an interaction between two people, you're watching the ego play out some of these tricks, maintaining their worldview, their belief wardrobe in reference to or as opposed to the other person's reference wardrobe. Let's look at a couple of these. Let me just name a couple of these. Oh, well, of course, the first thing that the ego will do when faced with any type of belief or evidence that conflicts with their held beliefs. And it's as if you can imagine people living in different sized little boxes or different sized little houses. As their consciousness expands, their boxes expand, so the possibilities increase as they get more and more expanded. So if they're both coming from these small conceptualizations of reality, they'll be saying, where did you hear that? That can't be true. Actually, sometimes you can actually feel where the line is drawn around their belief system. I have a friend, and he's a highly intelligent man, and he's been a Freemason for most of his life. And you can talk about the conspiracies going on around the world, and you can talk about the banking scams or any of the other 46 or 47 things that we're supposed to be terrified of right now. But if you happen to mention the Freemasons, it's almost like hitting a brick wall. We're not going anywhere from there. He is staunchly, I'm a Freemason. I know what they do there. They're a bunch of great guys. It's a wonderful organization. And of course he's right in a sense. I mean, most Freemasons, probably 95% of them, are great guys. They do this for networking. But on top of that organization, I don't have to explain this.
No, you don't have to explain. I mean, you painted such a great picture of it that I was there feeling that wall that you just walk into where you're suddenly left speechless and unable to continue. But hey, remember our old friend Paul, who his wall was aliens. He said, I'm very open to all this new information, whatever you want to tell me I haven't heard before. I'm really happy to entertain it and consider it. Until, of course, you start talking about aliens, I won't go any further then. But the cool thing about that was, he could actually see where his wall was, where the walls of his box ended. I don't think most people have any idea that they even have those walls.
Well, I think you're right. Actually, I was watching an interview this morning where David Icke was explaining that, the mainstream media has very tight parameters on what they can believe is real. The alternative media, well, they have different types of parameters. I mean, their parameters are wider, but sometimes they're not as wide as others. Like some news agencies, like Alex Jones, will talk about only things that can be verified in paperwork or actual physical reality. Some presenters of information now in the alternative media go outside of that because they realize that that's a holographic reality, and there's a lot of phenomenon that are happening and going on and actually pushing the planet around that aren't capable of being detected. So their parameters are a little bit wider. But the ego erects these walls, and you're not gonna get by them. And if your argument is just so strong, well, the ego can attack the character of the presenter. This ego, I mean, he gets paid to defend these beliefs. He gets paid to gather them, substantiate them by gathering more data, and then defend these beliefs. And these guys, I mean, they have some real moves. Anyway, this move is they'll attack the credibility of the presenter. And I'm sure you know what I mean, but if you want to see this acted out dramatically in front of you, if you watch some of the mainstream media interviewing someone with a little bit wider parameter of what's possible, or simply has an opinion that disagrees with the one that the station was to put across. They'll belittle this guy, they'll label his theories in the most derogatory type terms, and it's just like an assault on the character. And you can watch, as acted out on mainline TV, what your ego does all the time.
That's true. That's a great example.
Let me throw out another example. It probably happens all the time. Let's visualize an argument between creationists and Darwinian evolutionists. And they're arguing about the origins of man. They're both in a little box. The creationists are in this little box, very conforming, very traditional, and in that type of little box, they really rely on tradition and what's passed down. It's like wisdom of the elders kind of stuff. The ego position of the Darwinist is probably really hardcore physical reality. If you can't see it, it ain't there to them. And if you can picture these little boxes not having any room or even a window looking into the other box, they're just in their little boxes rattling. And truthfulness in this argument would not even enter the picture. You could show disproving evidence to the creationist, and he would just say, well, that's just God testing the non-believer. And if you show discrediting evidence to the Darwinist evolutionist, well, he'll just adjust timelines, call them anomalies, call them a fraud, or attack the character of the person who presented it. Those two things that the ego does are easily identified. I'm sure if you would take the time, you could probably find yourself doing it within the next 24, 48 hours. Those things are just things that automatically happen in everyday conversation. The big problem with the ego are things that he or she does behind the scene. And this blocks ego development, it blocks integration, it blocks learning, and it's just, I'm going to explain two of them in this podcast. One of them is called creating cognitive dissonance, and the other is this practice that's, my God, incredibly hard to stop, self-justification. Well, let's talk about cognitive dissonance first. Cognitive dissonance is holding two conflicting viewpoints in your mind at the same time and not letting them educate one another is what I like to say too. A good example is, let's say you're someone functioning along on the conformist stage, and very narrow box of what's reality and what can be reality, respecting tradition, not wanting to think outside the box too much, and all of a sudden you're abducted by aliens and put through some kind of strange procedures and then deposited back into your bed with time missing. Well, your brain's going to wake up in the morning and it's going to have two different realities in there. One is going to be your normal reality that you grew up with and everything's fine and we're alone on this planet. And the other one is this incredibly real reality that you just experienced. Well, what happens a lot of times is they'll just seal them off from one another. And they'll know the two realities, but they won't let them get together and adjust the overall picture of reality, the overall belief system, to incorporate both, which of course you can, depending on, the width of your brain, I guess. Mind, I think.
That was the best explanation of cognitive dissonance I've ever heard. Thank you.
Well, I have. I was thinking that adopting like sets of belief wardrobes all at once really sets the stage for cognitive dissonance to occur on a big time scale. Envision this. Let's say you're a child and you're growing up and you have Christian parents, and that seemed like the right religion for you. You adopted those beliefs, and some of those beliefs are really compassionate, loving, merciful, and that type of stuff. And let's imagine that in your belief wardrobe, those are your underwear. Your underwear is basically that Christian set of beliefs, that whole belief system working with you. Okay, so you grow up, you go through college, you come out and you get a job and you're working for a big international, transnational, global-wide corporation. And of course that corporation comes with a whole set of new beliefs, kind of a whole different type of clothing. And imagine that clothing, the corporate job, is your outer clothing. Now let's see how they fit together.